And we now understand that he is guilty on, if I could have that again, counts two and three. Leon, we are just being told that Mr. Dimora is now guilty on count 2. And let me go into some, I'll take these one by one. Count 2 is going to did deal with a project that was called the Alternatives Agency, Leon. That was that halfway house in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And the operators of that halfway house wanted that funding so badly that they, prosecutors said that they bribed Jimmy Dimora. And you're going to remember the bribe. The bribe is now the famous trip to Las Vegas, and which plied him with first-class airfare to and from Las Vegas. It gave him rooms in Las Vegas. It provided, the government prosecutors said they saw Ferris Kleem. You'll remember he was the businessman who also wanted contracts with the city, with the county. Ferris Kleem was there, and according to government FBI agents, provided a $1,000 prostitute for Jimmy Dimora one evening. They even have a phone recording of Jimmy Dimora calling Ferris Kleem after the woman left his room, and the Kleem essentially asking him, "How did you enjoy that?"
Ron, let me interrupt you. 4 and 5 also guilty. We're just getting that word.
Okay. All righty.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 guilty. Also, I'm getting information that 6 and 7 also guilty.
Okay, as we move into those counts, now we are starting to deal specifically with Ferris Kleem's contracts and with bribes supplied by Ferris Kleem, the Cleveland business owner. Some of those counts or activities included the trip to Las Vegas. Ferris Kleem provided the rooms at Las Vegas. As I mentioned a moment ago, he provided a $1,000, according to FBI agents, a prostitute sent up to Dimora's room. He wanted Jimmy Dimora's help on the taxiway project out at Cleveland Hopkins Airport. And he also wanted Jimmy's help on a project, a cement project out at the Juvenile Justice Center. And what's so interesting about the Las Vegas trip, Leon, is that all the while Commissioner Dimora is in Las Vegas being wined and dined, he is also on the phone back to Cuyahoga County at the bequest of Ferris Kleem to find out how Kleem's contracts are going with the county. So it was a very, very close relationship the two had, and apparently the jury believed that these bribes played a huge part in getting these contracts.
While we're waiting on the rest of these counts to come in, whether it's guilty or not guilty on these, I've just found out 8 and 9 are also guilty. 9 is the conspiracy to commit mail fraud and honest services mail fraud. That's number 9, also guilty on numbers 8 and 9.
Well, yes, and let me tell you about count number 8 dealt specifically with the county engineer's office. The county engineer's office was located in a project called the Stonebridge Project, and there were allegations made during the trial that Kevin Payne, who was the chief of staff at the engineer's office, would arrange for a condominium unit there for Jimmy Dimora to have private poker parties and sexual liaisons with women whenever Jimmy would ask for that. And so there was a great deal of testimony concerning that. Count number 9 also deals with Jimmy Dimora and his securing a job for a woman who the government alleged got her job because she was performing sexual favors for Mr. Dimora, and they presented to the jury one incident in particular that stands out. One day, Mr. Dimora used a hotel in Independence to meet this woman, and then later went to great lengths to help her get a job, which in county government, well, actually in Bedford, but used his influence to try to assist her in getting that job. Leon, I think there are additional counts now.
Yeah, 10 and 11 also guilty. 10 and 11 also guilty.
Okay. we're starting to move into the counts that deal with Jimmy Dimora's home improvements. You're going to have a contractor, John Valentin, who ran Salvestone, and there was a lot of prosecutors and FBI agents testified. The FBI agents testified that John Valentin put in tens of thousands of dollars worth of granite counters inside Jimmy Dimora's home. So that is going to be some of those counts. Additional counts are involve Nicholas Zavarella, who was another contractor who did work outside of Jimmy's home, did some, I think it was brick work at his patio and some construction work that Dimora never paid for.
Let me ask you, Ron, as we look at these first 11 counts, all found guilty on the first 11, we're going all the way down to 37. We'll see how it goes. Were you surprised that Jimmy Dimora did not testify, that he did not defend himself on the witness stand?
You know, Leon, I think there was a split kind of thinking on that.
Let me.
It would really have been his only chance to tell his side of the story, but I think the feeling was that if Jimmy Dimora got on the stand, they would have allowed him to be questioned by prosecutors in a way that would not have ended favorably for him.
Yeah. Let me just add that 12 and 13 also guilty. Counts 12 and 13 also guilty, Ron.
Okay, 12 and 13, again, that's Nicholas Zavarella and construction projects done, home improvements done at Dimora's home in exchange for awarding contracts to Nicholas Zavarella's construction company.
It is looks like the prosecution has been very effective in making its case there, Ron. And once again, what happens now? When does the sentencing portion take place? Of course, the big one, the RICO, the racketeering charge, and you told us earlier that could give 20 years, at least 20 years. When does the sentencing part of this take place? When would you guess? I know the judge has not spoken to that, but when would you guess?
Well, all of these charges could theoretically be piled up on each other. That's one thing I want to point out. So there's a likelihood that when all is said and done here, that it'll be a much longer period of time than 20 years. You know, as we move into counts 14, 15, and 16, and as we wait to hear on those, they involve a William Nieheiser and Reliance Mechanical, Leon. And you might recall that William Nieheiser is the individual, and we've just learned guilty on counts 14, 15, and 16. That is where the bribe of the Beanie Wells autographed football jersey from Ohio State comes in. And this is where prosecutors allege that William Nieheiser was trying to appeal to Jimmy Dimora by offering him gambling junkets. One was to Atlantic City, that didn't come off. Another one was over to Mountaineer in West Virginia. But that his purpose in appealing to all of this was, of course, to grease the way for his own contracts. And I want to take a second here as we wait for the rest of the counts. We're starting to move into the Steve Pumper counts, and that name might be familiar to you because he was early on a key figure. But let me just explain a bit here about the charges that he is being found guilty of. Many of these fall under what's called the Hobbs Act. And the Hobbs Act was created initially to protect entities against bribery that would affect interstate commerce. Well, interstate commerce is affected when an enterprise's assets are so-called depleted. And so it would infringe on an enterprise's ability to buy or sell goods. In this case, the enterprise is Cuyahoga County, and that is how the Hobbs Act comes into play on this. But what is particularly interesting, under the section that's called bribery under color of official right, what that means is that prosecutors need only prove that Jimmy Dimora promised an official act in exchange for something as it became available. Not that it was a this for that, not that I give you this and you do that for me, but only that he promised an official act in exchange for something as conditions arose. And this is the most interesting part of that.
In other words,
it's irrelevant whether or not Jimmy Dimora actually followed through on his end of the bargain, just that the offer was made.
He did not have to follow through. He did not have to deliver on the promise. Just say that we've got a deal, is what you're telling me.
That's exactly right, Leon. Mm-hmm. And that is why defense attorneys just really hate that particular statute, because it makes it very hard for them to defend that kind of behavior.
Ron, let me tell you, we just spoke to County Executive Ed Fitzgerald. He talked to News Channel 5, and he says that this was a big relief. Ed Fitzgerald says it was deserved. It was a shadow hanging over the county for a long time. It's time to move on. The words of County Executive Ed Fitzgerald, which comes as no surprise, because our whole county government changed as a result of all of these allegations which had come out several years ago.
All right, Leon, we've just learned that counts 17 through 21, all guilty. Now, these are the Steve Pumper counts. And I mentioned Steve Pumper a second ago because in many ways, all of this came crashing down on Jimmy Dimora in May of 2008, because that is when Steve Pumper, who ran a construction company called DAS Construction, was approached by FBI agents concerning Pumper's bribery of a Cleveland building and housing official. And during that encounter, Steve Pumper looked at the agents and said, "I think you really want Jimmy Dimora and Frank Russo." And that started, in many ways, Mr. Pumper's involvement in really putting the case together for the government.
That opened the door, in other words, for a lot which followed, which came out of that doorway.
Yeah, Pumper, you might recall this as well. Steve Pumper figured in former Common Pleas Judge Bridget McCafferty's trial, which ironically was just about a year ago to this day. And it was alleged during her trial that Jimmy Dimora pressured Judge McCafferty with trying to create a ruling in her courtroom that would be favorable to his friend Steve Pumper.
Well, this certainly is certainly a monumental day in this county, certainly in this state. I don't think Cuyahoga County or this part of the state has seen anything quite like this. We're looking at 37 counts against Jimmy Dimora, and so far the jury has found him guilty of the first 21 of 37, and once again the big one on top. 22 and 23 also guilty, Ron. I'm passing that little information along to you. 22 and 23 also guilty.